Good evening. Welcome to the April 16th meeting of Troy City Council. I'm Marty Baker, President of Council. Please silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting. We'll begin with the invocation by Mr. Todd Sievert, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Cameron Allison, Boy Scout Troop 365. Please stand.
Bow our heads, please. Dear God, as we gather this evening, we ask your blessing upon our city. We ask you to watch over every citizen entrusted into our care. Where there is brokenness, let there be healing. Where there is despair, let there be hope. Comfort those who grieve and guide those that are searching. Tonight, may you order our steps, and may they be taken with honesty, integrity, and courage. Let there be peace on earth, and may that peace take root in our city. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Lutz?
Here?
Mr. Terwilliger?
Here.
Mrs. Oda?
Here.
Mr. Twist?
Here.
Mr. Sievert?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Heath?
Here.
Mr. Kendall?
Here.
Mr. Swazer?
Here.
All members are present.
Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the April 2nd meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, April 2, 2018, committee reports. Community and Economic Development Committee recommended legislation be prepared to approve Sections 6 and 7 of Stonebridge Meadows Plan Development. Finance Committee recommended legislation be prepared to approve the Small Business Development Revolving Loan application of Slimline Surgical Devices. Law and Ordinance Committee recommended ordinance number 01328 be approved regarding BZA standards, also gave an oral report regarding a liquor license. Resolution number R10, 2018, contract for Miami Shores Golf Course Clubhouse renovation for second reading and adopted. Resolution number R11, 2018, application of Slimline Surgical Devices for loan, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 013, 2018, amending section of the zoning code regarding the BZA appeal standards was given third reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 018, 2018, final plat Stonebridge Meadows, first reading. Ordinance number 019, 2018, appropriating funds was given first reading and adopted. Following comments, council adjourned 7:39 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move we accept the minutes as read.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Heath to accept the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Approved.
We'll begin committee reports this evening with the Safety and Health Committee and Chairperson Mrs. Robin Oda.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met on April 2nd to review a request that the City of Troy continue to participate in the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan with Miami County Emergency Management Agency to receive FEMA funding due to damage from certain disasters, such as the city received following the windstorm damage from Hurricane Ike in September 2008. Troy must continue to be part of the Miami County plan or adopt its own plan. The city has participated in this program since 2006. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the City of Troy to continue to participate in the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan with the Miami County Emergency Management Agency. Respectfully submitted, Brock Heath, John Terwilliger, and myself as chair.
Are there any questions or comments from council? Thank you, Mrs. Oda. The next report comes from the Streets and Sidewalks Committee and Chairman Mr. Bobby Phillips.
Thank you, Madam President. The committee met on April 2nd to review the proposed 2018 paving program. The detailed report includes the funding for elements of the paving program and the list of street areas included in that program. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2018 paving program at a cost not to exceed $832,000. This is respectfully submitted by Councilman Heath, Councilman Lutz, and myself as chairman.
Are there any questions from council?
I have a quick question.
Yes, Mr. Lutz.
Thank you, Madam President. With the Complete Streets policy that was adopted last year, are any streets that are on the schedule going to have any pavement markings, treatments, or otherwise impacted by that policy?
We will be evaluating each street and comparing it to the policy as we go through the program.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Utilities Committee has the next reports from Chairman Mr. John Terwilliger.
Thank you, Madam President. On April 2nd, this committee met to consider authorizing bidding for the 2018 annual sanitary sewer lining project. As a result of televising the sanitary sewer system, needed projects have been identified. $100,000 has been budgeted for this work in 2018. The general areas to be relined this year are listed in a detailed report. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and to enter into a contract for the 2018 sanitary sewer lining project at a cost not to exceed $100,000. This is respectfully submitted, Mr. Lutz, Mr. Twist, and myself as chairman.
Are there any questions or comments from council? You may continue.
Thank you. On April 2nd, this committee again met to consider authorizing bidding for the replacement of the UV disinfectant system at the wastewater treatment plant. The project scope includes the removal and disposal of the existing system that was installed in 2000 and the purchase and installation of replacement systems. This is for an estimated cost and budgeted amount of $1,040,000. The project would be bid in two parts, purchase of equipment and installation. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the replacement of the UV disinfection systems at the wastewater treatment plant at a cost not to exceed $1,040,000. Respectfully submitted, Mr. Lutz, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Are there any comments or questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Terwilliger. We now open the meeting to citizen comments. At this time, does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to the agenda items this evening? If so, please come to the microphone and state your name and address. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Grant Kerber is our timekeeper.
Lester Connor, 1210 South Clay Street, Troy, Ohio. My question is tonight on the relining of the sewers. We had that done 3, 4, 5 years ago, and I was talking to the people that was doing it, and they were from Texas. And I said, you mean you had to come all the way here to Ohio to find jobs? They said, well, our wages are so high, it's hard to find work back there. And he said, Troy's paying us more than what our wages was back there. I thought, oh my gosh. So, you know, I want you to be looking into it and trying to make sure that our money is spent wisely and be a little frugal with the money for our sakes. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that has any comments at this point in the meeting? Seeing none, then we'll move on to resolutions and ask Mrs. Knight to read Resolution R12, 2018.
Resolution number R12, 2018, Resolution to continue participation in a multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan in conjunction with the Miami County Emergency Management Agency. This would be the second 5-year renewal of this participation, first reading.
Are there any questions or comments from council?
Move to suspend the rules.
Second.
It's been moved by Mrs. Oda and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R13, 2018.
Resolution number R13, 2018, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2018 paving program. Total cost not to exceed $832,000. The program includes also some paving for the Park Department and for the cemetery. First reading.
Are there any questions or comments from council?
I'll move to suspend the rules on that.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R14, 2018.
Resolution number R14, 2018, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for a sanitary sewer relining project, cost not to exceed $100,000. This is the first reading.
Move to suspend.
Are there any questions?
Oops, excuse
That's all
me.
right. Okay,
Now,
now you may.
I would move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Terwilliger and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Sievert to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R15, 2018.
Resolution number R15, 2018, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the UV disinfection system replacement project at the wastewater treatment plant. Cost not to exceed $1,040,000. First reading.
Are there any questions or comments from council?
I'll move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Terwilliger to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Mr. Kendall.
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
We'll move on to ordinances and ask Mrs. Knight to please read ordinance 018, 2018.
Ordinance number 018, 2018, ordinance accepting the final plat of Stonebridge Meadows Plan Development, Sections 6 and 7, in the city of Troy, Ohio, and dedicating right-of-way. This has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission. This Section 7 would be the last section of the development, second reading.
Are there any questions or comments from council?
Yes, Madam President.
Mr. Heath?
After hearing all the concerns that some of the residents had that live out there at the last meeting, and then also some of the things that I've been hearing behind the scenes, we had a meeting in the development. Mrs. Rhodes and several other staff members were kind enough to come out and talk to the people, answer some questions, try to get an idea. What came out of that meeting was, one of the things that came out was that she was going to be able to speak to Mr. Kerber, try to get some answers to that. It wasn't expected that that would be done by tonight, so we are looking to move this into a third reading to give that a little bit of time.
Are there any objections from other council members to go to a third reading?
No, that's fine.
Okay, this will then be ordered to a third reading, please.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
No, there are not.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Beamish, do you have any comments this evening?
Just a couple. On this April 19th, Thursday, the Caldwell House is honoring the first responders, that's both fire and police, not just in Troy, but throughout the Miami County. So if you're certainly welcome to come out and show your support as well. That is planned to take place at 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. I assume that's weather permitting. But that has been planned, and I thank the Caldwell House for honoring our first responders, not just in Troy, but throughout the Miami County area. That's the first thing, just as an awareness. The next thing I want to share is this is, believe it or not, the weather has been changing, but the Tree City USA has its award ceremony this Friday on the 20th. Troy will be receiving its 32nd consecutive Tree City USA Award, and I think we should all feel, as a community, feel very proud that we do have that in place and we'll receive that. It also corresponds with Earth Day, which is Sunday the 22nd. So if you're out planning, keep that in mind and keep the environment in mind. And then finally, just down the road, Arbor Day celebration will take place on Friday, April 27th. It will be at Minky Park, beginning at 10 o'clock. They will be honoring Bill Hobart and his legacy with a tree dedication. So if you're able to be a part of that, there will be students from all the elementary schools participate in that special ceremony. So that's just kind of the whole Arbor Day, Earth Day celebration events. Thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you. Mr. Titterington, do you have comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one announcement, just to follow with some of the meetings and dates coming up. We do have the public meeting where MKSK will share the results of the Sherwood Shopping Center study. That will be held at the shopping center. Again, maybe not again, but Thursday night, April 26th from 6 to 7 p.m. That's all I have. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Director of Law, Mr. Kerber.
I have nothing to report this evening, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you. City Auditor, Mr. Frigge.
Thank you, Madam President. I have nothing at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any comments from council members this evening?
Yes, Madam President.
Yes, Mr. Heath.
Yeah, just to follow up on what I was talking about before, I want to formally thank Jillian Rhodes, Christy Butera, and Tim Davis for coming out. They spent several hours after hours talking through with the citizens, and it meant a lot to everybody that they were able to come out and spend that evening with us out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on council?
Madam President, are you going to
Yes,
recognize
Mr.
leadership, Troy?
I am.
Okay. Then no.
Thank you. And To follow that up, is there
Nice lead-in.
Well, it's supposed to be
Any-
council president then council according to the agenda, so I just wanted to make sure we're following the, I'm going to go back to them vacation, I don't know.
We do have some Leadership Troy participants in the audience this evening, and I request that you please stand and introduce yourselves and perhaps tell us where you're employed. So, anyone from Leadership Troy, if you'd like to stand?
I'm Beth Peters with Minster Bank. I'm a loan officer here in Troy.
Thank you.
I'm Michael Moore. I work for the Troy City Schools.
Thank you.
I'm Teresa Packard. I work for CB3, a web development company.
Thank you. Do you have any questions this evening? I know that you've not gotten your city packets yet, but those are forthcoming, and please feel free to contact Mrs. Knight or the City Hall, any of us, once you get those, if you have any questions or would like to speak to whoever that you will be representing. Thank you. Are there any comments from city staff this evening? Anyone else in the audience have any comments? Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Carol Overmeyer, 215 Carriage Crossing Way. I know that it is a state highway, State Route 41, and I know that it does take the state to change the speed limit. I've lived in Carriage Crossing for 21 years. In the last 20 years, think about how much that has changed. Lowe's has been built, Caldwell House has been built, Wright Pack Credit Union has been built, strip malls. Right now, the one development by Fox Harbor is adding 3 houses right there. They did put a traffic light up at Washington, but the speed limit is still 50 miles an hour. They're coming from Covington, you've got like 7 or 8 miles, all 50 miles an hour. So they're going 60 miles an hour. And I just think somebody needs to look at it. And I know that the city could talk to the state or whatever, but I think it's an issue. The sign in front of Lowe's says that it's going down to 40 miles an hour in front of Myers. So all the rest of that is still 50 miles an hour. And when you think of the accidents, it needs to change a little bit. Somebody needs to look at it.
Mr. Titterington,
We will
do you
reach out
mind
to ODOT.
check that?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the audience have any comments?
Good evening, Lori Jackson, 2322 Larkspur Drive. I would like to come up here and thank Jill, Tim, Christy for coming out and actually looking at the issues in Stonebridge Meadows and talking with us. And after that meeting, I really hope that we can come to a productive solution, as well as come up with a plan that residents can know about, as well as an estimated completion date. But again, I want the council to hear from a resident that we greatly appreciated you coming out, listening to us, and actually seeing what we're talking about. So thank you to the engineering department, Tim. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience have any comments? Thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. Have a safe and peace-filled week. Meeting adjourned.